Good morning, America. Welcome to Guardian Tax Law. And we've got a lot to cover today. A lot has happened in the news. And the topic of the day is we're going to be focusing on corporations. What does it mean to incorporate? How do you do it? And how can that help protect you, your business, and help you function better and understand how to run your company more efficient manner? So, there's a lot to this topic, so I'm going to break it down somewhat. But again, I think it's something that can be very handy and helpful. When should I incorporate and take my business to the next level? So a lot of news today, especially with the Fed rate cut. So we're going to be diving into that. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back after this first break. Welcome back, everybody. So we've got a lot to cover, and I'm just going to dive right in because I do want to spend a decent amount of time on our topic for the day. So the first article we're going to share is an example of what not to do when it comes to taxes. So let me just go and it's giving me a little bit of trouble finding the right article. There we go. So this is a local channel, Cron 4, from the Bay Area. This is people talk about tax evasion, what is it, and tax fraud. This is tax evasion. So instead of using the IRS rules and legitimate deductions and credits, that's called tax avoidance, which is illegal. If you use the rules for you and the rules that are there and you follow the rules, it's called tax avoidance. It's perfectly legal and you have a legal right to do so. The Supreme Court has even held that. However, this gentleman from Contra Costa used tax evasion. What is evasion? Is when you illegally conceal income, don't report it, and again, this guy did it to the tune of millions of dollars. He did it through 2016 through 2019, failed to report $3.4 million paid to him. Gives false and overstated expenses, all big red flags for the government, which he used to reduce his tax bill. And so he unreported capital gains and dividends by more than 2.4 million. So I think it's interesting here, though. He's going away. He's going to federal prison. So first, he's going to be a felon for a year and a day. So he was sentenced to a year and a day in prison and 36 months of supervised release. So that's going to be 4 years before he's done with this, and he's ordered to pay $438,000 in restitution. Why only $438,000? Because most of the money's probably already gone, and a fine of $7,500. So going to jail for a year, he might have money squirreled away. He might have other money set aside, but I would imagine that the restitution is only $438,000 when we're talking about millions and millions of dollars here. It's probably all gone. It probably doesn't have anything left. So this might be stripping out some of his last resources. So again, just to give you an idea, some of the things not to do. Anything we do with the IRS, we will share full-heartedly and openly with the IRS. We don't hide anything because it's not worth it. Absolutely not worth it. So do things right, and again, you can still save tons of money. You can still save on taxes, but also get that peace of mind that you don't have to worry about these kinds of issues. So next article here, this is just a quick article from irs.gov about Hurricane Debby victims in Pennsylvania. And these are real. I come across people that were hit and affected by various natural disasters across the country. And so Pennsylvania, parts of Pennsylvania have been added to this list. Lycoming, Potter, Tioga, and Union counties in Pennsylvania. So if you or your area where you live has been hit by a natural disaster, you can always go to irs.gov and tax relief in disaster situations, and it tells you by state which areas are eligible and what the deadlines are. So again, it's going back. February 3rd is a very popular date where a lot of these deadlines are getting pushed back to. So it's an extension for a federal return if you already have a valid extension. Estimated tax payments that were due on September 16th and January 15th got pulled out, and as well as tax returns normally due on October 31st and January 31st. Your business returns that were due on the 16th. So if you had a valid extension, that was pushed out as well. So again, if you have questions, check this out. Go to irs.gov and check out this tax relief and disaster situations link to find out if you qualify. Next article. Google and Apple, a lot of the big tech companies have been in plenty of antitrust battles, not only here in the United States, but in Europe. And Google finally got a court victory, rightly or wrongly. So they've been hit with a $1.7 billion fine by a European court for anti-competitive actions. And Google, that's what they thrive on. And I am not a tech, I'm not an monopoly or antitrust attorney. I don't delve in this, but everybody knows Google has definitely had sharp elbows to try to dominate market space. So it's absolutely being appealed. In June, a U.S. federal district court in the United States ruled against it and said that it used illegal tactics to hold on to its monopoly in the online search engine market. And then they got smacked with a $2.7 billion fine in the EU, and they're dealing with another suit in the UK. So again, Google is getting hit all over the place for their anti-competitive actions. And so it's back in 2018, they got smacked with another $4.5 billion fine regarding their Android-based mobile phone manufacturers. So it's ongoing. We'll see what happens, and it could have a huge impact on Google and as well as Apple, which are the two biggest names in tech, and how that affects our devices and how we access the internet. So we've got a series of articles about the government, and this is again another example of waste, fraud, and abuse by our federal government. Anybody surprised? And this program, $40 billion was spent to expand the internet to rural areas, and this article goes after Kamala Harris. But to be fair, wasting government funds is something that both parties are very good at doing. So I'm not just pointing the finger at Democrats, but this is one example of absolute waste, fraud, and abuse. So you had $42 billion broadband. It was for broadband equity, access, and deployment, especially for rural areas that don't have good connectivity. Not one person has been connected to the internet using this program in 3 years. $42.45 billion allocated for the program. The rollout has been messy, delayed, and it's been a mess. And it's not just Republicans calling this out. There are Democrats upset about this as well, that they had this huge program, and almost 3 years. No, that is, I believe it's right around 3 years. Not a single person is connected to the unit after spending $42 billion in government funds. This has been the largest investment in U.S. history with absolutely nothing to show for it. So again, that's a problem when you put government in charge. They excel at waste, inefficiency, and bureaucracy. So it's just kind of scary to see this. And jumping to the next article here, this is something that's a little bigger and it could very well affect a lot of people. Again, we have facing another budget fight right before the election. Speaker Mike Johnson, tried to pass a bill, a continuing resolution to keep the government up and running, and it got voted down. 14 Republicans joined the Democrats to vote down his bill. So, and this article allows them to kind of explain why they voted against it, when the vast majority of Republicans voted for this. So, Speaker Johnson, what he did is he attached the SAVE Act. It's an effort to crack down on non-citizens voting. Democrats claim that this is not needed. They're going to fight this tooth and nail, especially right before the election. And so some of the concerns here is, first of all, it's another continuing resolution. They're not cutting or even trying to cut anything out of government spending, which, again, we just talked about, $42 billion set on fire. And again, it goes to the heart of this, that when are Republicans going to get serious about cutting spending? We're spending like crazy, almost $2 trillion over budget this year, and yet nobody's serious about cutting spending. We're just passing the buck along. So again, we can play with the numbers. We can cut, raise interest rates. It won't matter. If we continue to overspend, we're heading towards a fiscal cliff that once we get there, it's going to be very, very hard to reverse course. We're already spending $1 trillion a year just on interest on the debt. So that's the main reason why these Republicans, list them out, vote against the measure. And you had some people that voted present instead of voting against it, had the same effect. And they're saying, look, we can actually do a budget. We don't have to do another continuing resolution and just kick the can down the road. From Andy Biggs, it continues to fully fund all of the current budget spendings and fails to secure any kind of cuts. So Lauren Boebert calls it the surrender CR. We have the power of the purse. We should be using it to cut spending, control the border, do something here. And we're asking for just the SAVE Act, which again, here you have Tim Burkett, rightly or wrongly, saying, look, I'm not voting for a CR that would continue digging at your grandchildren's financial hole. And then one of these acts have already been passed. Senate is ignoring both. And so a lot of them are critical of what Johnson is doing, that it's just punting the ball further down the road rather than actually doing something about it. So again, we might be heading for another government shutdown right in the middle of election, which would be interesting to see. But again, the question is, when do we actually start cutting? It needs to happen. The Democrats are absolutely not serious about it, and most Republicans don't seem to be serious about it either. So that's the question, is that they want to kick that football down the road. And again, we're up against the break, so I'm going to have to go ahead and pause. Welcome back, everybody. Just want to finish up with this story real quick here about the budget fight that we're facing. Really, in my opinion, I'm very much a fiscal conservative. every time conservatives or Republicans are promised tax cuts, we'll do something. It feels like Charlie Brown trying to kick the football from Lucy. Lucy's holding the football, and she always yanks the football away at the last minute. Is now the time for the budget fight? I'm not sure. But why didn't they have this budget fight earlier? It seems like there's never a good time to have a good budget fight and actually try to cut spending in a serious way. Again, Republicans talk a good game. Are they actually serious about it? And that's one of my biggest questions for President Trump. Is he serious about cutting spending? Because apparently very few people have been on the right. So let's see what happens. Again, they'll have to come back with another bill and see if they can get across the finish line. Moving on. This is a little bit interesting article because Speaker Johnson came out and made a statement that would rankle some Republicans, not all of them. But he said that he was open to keeping subsidies for some green energy projects. I don't have a problem with that. If it makes sense, if it's working, great. If it's a wasteful boondoggle, cut it, get rid of it. And we should really look at the entire federal government like that. So this idea of having a government efficiency council to recommend massive cuts to the government, I think that would be great if they'll actually do it. I just don't want more of a dog and pony show where they say, hey, look what we're doing, but not actually cut anything. That's how Congress typically, and the government typically acts. But this is something, and this is from the New Review, or National Review. Green agenda drives up energy costs, drives up utility bills, and who can least afford it? Lower income households. So whenever we pass more legislation, we make vehicles more expensive. Who does inflation hurt the most? Lower income families. And so the cost of rapidly transitioning, forcing the world economy from natural gas to green energy source for income will obviously hurt the lower income families the most. And now it's been acknowledged across the world that, in Italy, and so, in most climate change mitigation policies, carbon pricing, hurt drive up energy bills for businesses and households, and again, just hurts the poorest the most as we go through this. So there's always a give and take when we pass any kind of bill that raises the cost of doing business, of supporting your family, and again, it affects people in a real way, and too often we're not mindful of that. Next topic here, President Trump is weighing in on the government shutdown, and he's saying, look, we should shut down the government over this. Speaker Johnson is saying the opposite, that he's not going to shut down the government. They'll get something done and get it passed. But again, he's saying, look, we really have to control elections. And with his election coming up, it really is a big issue. And so the question is, and this is what's nuts. If they were serious about passing it, you would think the whips would make sure they have the votes. They would talk to everybody, make sure they have it done. And it failed, which means a lot of this might be just for show. So again, Trump's saying, look, shut the federal government down. Have a real fight about this. Put Biden and the Senate on record voting against this. Is right now, just before an election, the best time to have a shutdown? I don't know. But again, Mike Johnson's pushing that back against this somewhat. But again, it's going to get more interesting as we get deeper into this, if this actually turns into a budget fight and a shutdown right before an election. Next article, also from Trump, coming out, and this is interesting. A lot of people really criticized the use of tariffs and Trump comes out, he's going to hit this by 200% Mexican auto imports by 200%, making them unsellable in the U.S. So this is an interesting thing because who's funding most of these auto imports? China is. And who's supporting it? The Chinese government. So we have a tax, and both Biden and Trump have both tried to out tariff each other when it comes to Chinese goods being imported from China. So what China companies, the Chinese government is now subsidizing Chinese companies to build plants and manufacture stuff in Mexico and then just sell them across the border. So it's still going to China. It's still a plan by the Chinese government to undercut and destroy our auto manufacturing here in the U.S. So, Trump's fighting back against this. Whether or not this will be successful, whether or not we just talked about costs and increases to average consumers, this will make vehicles more expensive in the short run. Make it more expensive to repair vehicles? Absolutely. Should we be fighting back against the Chinese Communist Party's subsidies and purposely targeting our manufacturing to hurt the American economy? Yes. But this, again, be aware that this will lead to increased costs. So you have, auto workers coming up, and on one hand, Trump makes this comment that tariffs are the greatest thing ever invented. I disagree. It can definitely stifle trade. It can stifle innovation. But should they be used judiciously? Absolutely. There are times for tariffs to be employed. It's not. It needs to be used judiciously, and part of my concerns here is that Trump wants to throw tariffs around too much. So should we be concerned about this? To some extent, yes. Slapping Chinese manufacturing in Mexico with tariffs, probably a good idea. Because again, we know that they're trying to do an end round around American tariff laws by just producing things in Mexico. So they think they're going to make their cars in Mexico and then going to sell them across the line, and we're going to take them and not charge them a tax. So Trump is saying, we're going to get this. We're going to address this. So Mexico is the largest export market for U.S. automotive parts. But Mexico's share of U.S. auto parts increased from 38% to 42.5%. It has been a growing problem and has been hurting American manufacturers. So you get some experts, Kenneth Raposa, talking about this, and Brian Pennebecker, who is has 36 years working on vehicles, supporting Trump, talking about his personal experience. It really does hurt people in a real way. So moving on, I want to go ahead and move on to one of the biggest pieces of news that came out yesterday, and I've been talking about this. The Fed cut rates, and they jumped from 0.25% to 0.5%. So a big jump here. To lower rates by 0.5 percentage point. Again, this is a huge jump. This is the first time they've cut rates in the last 4 years. So ever since COVID, so they cut rates drastically. Kind of give you an idea. Historically, since 2000, rates were much higher, and then 9/11, rates were cut drastically to help with that recession, and then they edged back up, and then 2008 crash, things dropped all the way down to zero, and they were kept there really until 2016, and then they slowly started edging up through 2016, going to Trump's presidency, and then COVID hit. So this is basically, they dropped the rates to zero to help the economy, but again, you can see here, keeping it low pretty much through the Obama years has led to massive bubbles, and it's one of those things that led to a lot of cheap money, but we're seeing the consequences today. We're seeing the effects of overspending, and the cheap money bonanza. COVID had dropped, and then they raised it, and now they're dropping it by half a percentage point. So, question is, Wall Street is loving this. Stocks are jumping. A lot of different assets are jumping right now on the news of this half a percentage point cut. Long term, though, are they doing this because inflation has been tamed? No. They're doing this because of weakness in the labor market. So this 50% point cut suggests the Fed is worried about the labor market, and it is an unusually large move in the context of economic data that we've been receiving, given little stress in the financial markets. So this is all about risk management concerns due to different issues that they're seeing, high inflation and rising joblessness. So again, the labor market has been very weak, and they're trying to help boost the economy right now. And so there's a lot of people reading into it. What does this mean? Why are they doing this? Again, they're answering a lot of questions on this. I'm not going to dive deeper into this because it just gets too much into the weeds. But something to be very aware of. I was just talking to someone yesterday, and they are looking to purchase a home, and they were trying to close yesterday. And I said, well, hold the phone. Oh, no, 2 days ago they were trying to close. I said, well, tomorrow the Fed's announcing a rate cut, most likely. So hold off for a day or two and then look at it. And it actually has helped her just to hold off, pay attention to this long-term gain. Is this really going to be where our economy needs to go in the long run? That's a completely different question here. So what I want to do now is just switch to our topic of the day and focus on that for the rest of the show today. Corporate tax issues. So again, a lot of people, their eyes will just roll in the back of their head and have an out-of-body experience. It's one of those things that just sounds like, what am I doing? If you already have a business set up, and many do, millions of people have businesses that are set up. The important thing is, one, doing it right and using that EIN to protect you and your family moving forward. So I've talked about this, but I haven't made a show specifically about this. And I think it's very important as you're starting your business to kind of go through the steps and get good advice. Now, we don't do corporate formation. Just want to throw that caveat out there. We do work with corporate attorneys that do that. Most CPAs can actually help you set up a business. And it's not that hard. It's just not within our niche that we stay in with tax debt resolution. So if you're out there starting a business, most people start off as a sole prop. You're just working, and this is just a very basic kind of business. What a sole proprietorship means, or sole prop, is you're just working under your social. You're just doing some kind of side business. You're getting things together. You don't have any kind of formation, any kind of planning. Even as a sole prop, the one thing you need to do is go get a business bank account. They're not hard to open. You can even open one under your social security number if you don't have an EIN. But you should have a separate account in the name of your business, and you need to run all of your income and expenses through that account. Whatever you're going to take for your personal needs, like your normal personal budget, you transfer that from your business account to your personal account, and then you spend it as if you normally would if you got a paycheck. So that really, your bookkeepers, your CPAs will thank you so much for not mixing business and personal expenses. When you're mixing them, it makes it very easy for the IRS to come in and audit and disallow all kinds of expenses. So that's one of the biggest problems I see, is when people don't treat their business as a business. and everything I'm going to talk about. If you don't treat a business correctly the way it's supposed to be treated, the business can be shoved aside in many instances, and they'll just disallow a lot of expenses. So again, when you are using these legal entities and laws for your benefit, you have to do it right. So the first form is just a sole prop. There's no protections there. Anything that happens with the business, you're fully responsible for it, because there's no barrier between your social security number and the taxes. So the first step is to go out and get an EIN. Anybody can go on irs.gov and you can request an EIN. They'll send it to you in the mail. They give these out like candy. So you need to have a business name. You need to have an address for the business. It can be your personal address. It doesn't have to be something fancy. If you have are expecting a lot of mail, you're going to want to use, and you don't want clients to have your home address. You're going to want to use a separate address. When I first started my business, I used the post office box because I didn't want all kinds of mail coming to my home, and I didn't want tax clients to have my home address. So you can use a post office box. There are plenty of virtual offices now where you can use their address. But getting that EIN in place does a couple things. First of all, it separates out the business debt from your personal debt. So the first step is, if you've already had a business account under your social security number, you need to reopen another account under the EIN. So it is a pain if you move everything from a business account under your social security number to a new account under the EIN, but you have to do it because those assets, whatever income you have flowing through there, if you have it running through a social security number under your personal account. I've seen businesses that have done this. They've gotten an EIN and they've never opened an account under their EIN. You have to make the transition. So a lot of people, when they're forming a business, especially if they have someone giving them good advice, the first thing they'll do is they'll get the EIN and then they'll go create the business account. You don't have to start off as a sole prop. If you do, it's fine, but as your business grows and starts to bring in more money, you're going to want to move to an EIN. And it's not expensive. It's not hard to do. You just have to go through those motions. So that's why a lot of people will just get the EIN and open that business account first, so they don't have to do that transition from a personal to a business account. So if you have tax issues under your social security number, you owe taxes or whatever, the IRS can't go after the EIN and accounts under the EIN, and vice versa. If there's a business tax, they can go after what's under the EIN, but not your personal accounts. So I guess I switched those. So just having bank accounts set up correctly with an EIN versus a social security number is the first layer of protection for you. The second layer of protection is that when you have an EIN and for some reason the business fails, you have to close it down, etc., you can close that EIN out, close out those business accounts, and it cuts off liability for taxes. So there are exceptions to that, and we're running short on time. So we're going to have to address that when we come back from this next break and explain that. So again, we'll be right back in just a moment. Welcome back, everybody, and glad to continue this topic. There's a lot of information here. We're just going to scratch the surface, and this will probably turn into a multi-part topic here. And so first of all, we're talking about making sure you have a business account and getting that under an EIN. If you're running your business as a sole prop under your social security number, just know you have no protections. Somebody sues the business, they can go after your personal assets. And again, if the business has a contract that fails, you're 100% liable. Now, if you have issues under the EIN, you can contain some of that damage under the EIN. For example, if you have an SBA loan and you take it out in the name of the company or the EIN, as long as it's under $200,000, the SBA didn't request any personal guarantees, which means that you can easily, not easily, but you can walk away from the debt. So that's a new thing that was announced later. Of course, they're not telling people that when they first took out the loans, but you can still go out and get SBA loans. And so I don't recommend people do this, because if you do default and you are held personally responsible, again, you have to do this right. You have to be opening business. If you're trying to defraud the SBA and just take money and not pay it back, there's a whole host of issues that go with that. Again, we want to make sure everything is done above board. We're not trying to hide anything from the government or the IRS. But if you go and you take an SBA loan and the business doesn't pan out, it doesn't work, you have a layer of protection against government debt, and especially any tax debt. Now, sales taxes are different because people actually collect sales taxes. Most states hold people personally responsible for sales tax. So if you're the owner of a company and you don't pay sales taxes, that's absolutely something you want to pay. Number two, expense that you can be held, or two tax that you can be held personally responsible for, payroll taxes. So don't play around with payroll taxes, don't play around with sales taxes. But if you do have other tax debt, sometimes it happens, but try to avoid those. If you have other tax debt or assessments against the business, if it's state debt, they tend to go after the person, the individual. But depending on the state, you can close out some business taxes and leave it under the EIN. You just have to make sure that you close it out correctly. And even California, one of the worst states to deal with, has gotten a lot better about allowing people to close out businesses and not have to pay an $800 fee that's not gone up. I think it's gone up to $1,100 every single year in California. So there are programs now where you can close out your business and not have to file all those old returns and pay all the fees that go with that. So dig into this. But we close out businesses all the time with the IRS, where tens of or hundreds of thousands of dollars are still owed under the EIN. We're able to close out the business successfully, and the individual can walk away, and it doesn't affect them. They don't have to file bankruptcy on it. The only time I've seen it affect anybody in that situation is when someone was applying for a state bar to become an attorney in the state. State bars are notorious for being, for many new attorneys, they're notorious for nitpicking everything beyond reason. So I actually testified in front of a hearing for the state bar in that case, and they didn't listen. I said, look, nobody would pay this. This is unreasonable. This is what you're asking for is well beyond what your average any business person would have to do. Didn't matter. So the state bar will do whatever it wants. Sometimes people have to hire attorneys and sue them to actually get them to do the right thing. Anyway, some of the other formation possibilities is that when you go you form a corporation, there's a LLC, but there's also a partnership you can form. So be very careful when you form partnerships. Make sure that in the formation language, if you're a minority partner, your rights and responsibilities are laid out clearly and followed. If they're not being followed, make sure you know and understand what's happening within the business that you're a partner of. The case I was just talking about, she was a minority partner. Her partner ran the business, destroyed it, didn't know what she was doing, and there were plenty of taxes that resulted, and then her partner disappeared. Everything's hunky-dory when you go into a situation, but that's the job of attorneys. We're the worrywart. We're the ones that say you can have this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem. Let's prepare and protect you from potential problems. But when you have two people, they're both going into a business, they have this idea, they want to put it on paper, they want to see it actually come to fruition. They're very optimistic, things are very rosy, they think everything's going to go great. And again, if you didn't have that optimism, you wouldn't have business creation, you wouldn't have economic growth. But the reality of it is most small businesses fail. Maybe they're successful for a while, maybe they support someone, maybe it's time, the economy's changed, life has changed, and maybe it's time to close down the business and do something else. So that's where having good planning in place can really help protect you. And so her majority partner incurred tax debt, payroll liabilities, and then she left the picture, didn't respond. She was responsible, but the minority partner was. And while she was going to law school, this was a problem. And then when she graduated law school and tried to get a law license, that's when they stopped and said, no, we're not going to do this. And it became a huge problem for her, even though she was the minority partner, didn't have a say in what happened. I had another case where someone absolutely was a minority partner, didn't know what was going on, didn't know about the tax bill, didn't know that his partner, he was a 20% minority partner. When the revenue officer came and issued the interviews to determine who should be held responsible for the unpaid taxes, he didn't even know about it. He didn't find out about it until it was too late. So we appealed it, we tried to get it addressed, and the IRS said no. So we had to deal with it a different way for him, but it was a very frustrating situation. And part of the problem is you find out about these issues years later, and getting proof is very difficult, especially when the majority partner disappears. So any kind of partnership, make sure you have a really good operating agreement. Make sure that you are getting information. If you end up with a partner that is not sharing good information, that you don't have a neutral CPA that shares information with both partners, be aware. Be very aware. If there are issues, you need to get out. If you have someone that's not being a good partner and they're not following their obligations, have an exit strategy or exit clause in your partnership agreement. Get out and say, look, if you're not informing me, if you're not doing your due diligence so I can be informed, I'm out. And it is your due diligence as a minority partner to make sure you're fully informed. So I have seen this hurt people too many times, which is why I'm kind of harping on it now. Make sure that if you are in a partnership, you have a very good operating agreement. I would recommend going to a corporate attorney to get that drafted. They're not as expensive as you would think. It doesn't, I mean, they can charge a few, less, a couple $1,000s, maybe a few hundred, but what it can save you and headache down the line from a bad partner absolutely can help. And sometimes it's not someone being a bad partner. Life just happens. They get sick. I have a situation now where a father died that was running the farm, and then the grandfather that was also running the farm died a couple years later, had a stroke, wasn't able to handle things, and died a couple years later. And now the sons are inheriting a mess. They didn't have a good succession plan in place. They didn't have a good operating agreement that allowed for these contingencies. And when situations changes, that's when you need to get in and say, hey, we need to revisit this. We need to change our business formation to match our current situation. And it needs to have contingencies in case something happens. So if you plan for these events, you can handle it. They're easy to handle. If you don't plan, that's where people get burned. And then you need to hire me. So again, I can't emphasize, I'm raising these issues because I've seen them. I've seen them plenty of times. So I keep mentioning a corporate attorney. If you don't have a good corporate attorney, I can refer you to one. I do know corporate attorneys across the country, or people that I can refer you to that have experience, and it can save you so much headache to go in and get a corporate attorney to set things up. And ideally, you have a corporate attorney that has some estate planning experience or works with an estate planner to put your corporate planning hand in hand with your estate planning needs. So again, we're going to next We're going to kind of connect the two and talk about that in the next session, some of the things, pitfalls and what to watch for there. So as far as once you set up your business as an LLC, as a partnership, or I'm going to go for an S Corp or C Corp. So if you go as just an LLC, you have to choose S Corp, C Corp. Most small businesses are going to choose S Corp. It makes the most sense. It's easier to handle, and you want a formation that you know how to handle so that you're following the rules and treating the business the way it should be treated. That's where people get in the most issues, is where they're not treating it the right way. They're not keeping separate, again, those bank accounts. I cannot emphasize how important it is to have that done. They're not doing separate returns. If you don't file business returns for years, and you run everything through your personal accounts or etc., if you don't treat it like a business, the IRS can ignore it as well, or treat all the asset as personal income, and that's where you don't get all those business deductions, or they can be ignored. So this is why good big bookkeeping, having a good CPA in place can save you a lot of money in taxes. They can save you a lot of stress and help prepare for the long run. So one last thing, it might sound very scary to have to file business returns. It's not nearly as complicated as you would think. Any CPA or most tax preparers make sure that they're familiar and comfortable with business returns. But the business returns are an 1120 or a 1065, and if you're an S Corp, it's called an 1120S. Essentially what they do is that they take the business, instead of putting it on a Schedule C or a profit and loss statement, and they just put it on a different form, and it carries over to your personal return. For example, on an 1120S for an S corporation, your business profit, expenses all go on to the 1120 form, and then the net profit comes over and goes directly under your 1040. It's that easy. Now, if you have a partnership, you have all that information that goes on the 1065 partnership return, and then K1s are issued from the partnership, just like a 1099, and the K1 that's filed from the partnership return just shows as income on your 1040. So your share of the net profit of the business is what's reported on the K1 and goes on your personal return. Now, last thing I'm going to talk about this, that if you're not looking at your profit and loss and your share of net profit as a partnership, or how much your business is making throughout the year, you're making a mistake. And it's something that's very, very common in the business world, is that people don't look at these numbers except for when they get their tax returns filed. And now people on extension filing their business returns, deadline just hit in September 16th. And now you have a month to file your personal returns on extension. But if you're filing those by September of the following year, you don't have good numbers. You don't know what your business did, whether it was thriving or suffering, or if you had a loss. And one of the big issues facing businesses today are doing regular estimated tax payments. The penalty for not doing those throughout the year is now 8%. Now that the Fed is actually starting to cut rates, we might see a change coming up in December. Who knows? But 8% is a pretty hefty bill, and that's on top of all the normal taxes. So in November, Congress increased it from 3% to 8% to match probably real inflation, or something much closer to real inflation. So you need to be looking at your numbers every single quarter. Did I have a profit or did I have a loss? And if I had a profit, how much do I need to pay on that profit to make sure I'm not going to owe taxes at the end of the year? So if you have questions, give us a call. We're going to continue this conversation tomorrow. There is a lot to cover. Again, 485-7371 is our phone number. Our website is at guardiantaxlaw.com, and you can always click on the YouTube link at the top of our website to go and see these videos, past videos, and again, we have all the websites that we've shared linked to our shows as well. So again, thank you for watching Taxes Made Easy here on the smartmoneyculture.tv, and we will see everybody tomorrow to continue the conversation and try to help inform you and make it sounds complicated when you start talking about all these other forms, but if you're on top of it, it makes it easy, and that's our whole goal is to make your taxes easy.